Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Gather and Go, the podcast that helps you plan, promote, and lead better trips. I'm Brian Jewell. I am your host. I am thrilled to be back with you after a brief summer break and thrilled that you are back with us as well. And of course, our promise to you, as always, is that we're going to do everything we can to make this investment of your time worth your while. Today, I have a great featured conversation for you with travel branding expert Ross Evans. If you don't know Ross, he is one of the creative minds at Redpoint Marketing. He is going to share with us how you can create a great visual brand for your travel company. He's got thoughts on why travel companies need to pay more attention to branding than other businesses do. And he's going to share insights on how you can build a visual brand on a tight budget. That's definitely something you're going to want to hear. Before we get there, though, let's start with some travel news you may have missed. Tauck is launching a new brand for younger travelers. The legacy tour company, which has been taking travelers on luxury trips around the world for 100 years, has unveiled Rome by Tauck, a new brand for travelers in their 40s and 50s. The new brand will offer small group journeys averaging 16 passengers each, with a focus on balancing flexibility, active adventures, and signature experiences. The Rome itineraries will range in length from 5 to 11 nights and will feature land tours, river cruises, and small ship explorations. Tauck CEO Jennifer Tombaugh said the new brand, quote, represents a natural evolution of what we've always believed. Travel has the power to enrich, restore, and transform. The new itineraries will feature an emphasis on leisurely mornings, extended evenings, and spa and wellness amenities. Groups will stay at each hotel property for 3 to 4 nights, giving travelers time to unpack, relax, and immerse themselves in their destinations. The brand is launching with 5 itineraries in 2026, and leaders expect to have 12 Rome itineraries active across 6 continents by 2027. Well, now it's time for the road tip segment of our show. This is the part of every episode where we dig deep into our bag of travel knowledge from decades on the road and bring you tips to make your next trip less stressful and more successful. Now, I have shared with you before that most of the time when I travel, I try to limit my packing to one small rollboard suitcase that I don't have to check with an airline that I can just carry on the plane with me. And if there is one packing technique more than any other that allows me to do that, it is this. Whenever I can, I bring just one single pair of shoes on a trip. Yeah, if you think about it, the one item that can take up more space than anything else in a suitcase is shoes, especially if they are large shoes, chunky shoes, irregularly shaped shoes. Well, they just eat up tons of real estate in that bag. My number one secret to traveling light is to bring as few shoes on a trip as possible. And these days, I got to tell you, more often than not, I've got it down to a single pair of shoes. Now, I know immediately some of you are thinking, especially some of you that are shoe lovers, maybe some of you who are women are saying, well, maybe you can get away with that, Brian. I can't get away with that because fashion or this and that. I just have to have my shoes. And listen, I'm not going to try to change your mind if you just really love having a bunch of shoes with you on a trip. But if you would perhaps like to find a way to reduce or eliminate some of the extra shoes you're bringing with you, let me suggest what I have decided is perhaps the best kind of shoe to bring for almost any kind of trip. For me, the one pair of shoes that I can wear almost anywhere is sneakers and or running shoes. My favorite sneakers are running shoes. I've been wearing running shoes for years and years. These days, running shoes are my go-to shoes, whether I am working out, whether I am hanging out around town or going on a trip. Let me tell you 4 quick reasons why I love running shoes for travel. Number 1, they are comfortable. They're the most comfortable shoes I've ever worn. They feel great on my feet all throughout the day. Very closely related reason number 2 is running shoes offer fantastic support. Now, this might be true of other athletic sneakers as well, whether they are designed for running or walking or tennis or some other activity. A great sneaker provides great support. And when you travel, you are likely doing a lot more standing and walking than you would during a day at home or a day in the office. And by the end of that day, I can tell a really big difference between if I've been wearing dress shoes or fashionable shoes, or whether I have been wearing my running shoes, because my back, my legs, my feet, they just feel so much better at the end of that day because of the support that those sneakers offer. Another great reason that I love using sneakers as my main travel shoes is that they are just so gosh darn versatile. You can wear them indoors. You can wear them outdoors. They are great when you're on uneven terrain. They work in the fitness center. And more of the world is changing to where sneakers are actually being accepted as appropriate attire, even in business settings. That brings me to reason number 4, which is that sneakers these days have gotten really, really stylish. If you are the kind of person that objects to a single pair of shoes on fashion grounds, I would say maybe you just haven't been looking at the right kind of sneakers. There are sneakers of every imaginable shape and color these days. There are people who collect them. There are people who pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for collectible and fashionable and limited run sneakers. So I really do believe that the right, well selected and well thought out pair of sneakers or running shoes or something like that can serve you well in a business context, in a hiking context, in an airport context, in a casual workout context. There's really nothing in 2025 that a great pair of sneakers or running shoes can't do. So next time you go to pack for a trip, put those sneakers on when you depart. Free up some room in your suitcase. You'll be able to have much more space for other stuff you need, or much more space for the souvenirs that you want to bring home from the trip. And your feet and your legs will thank you. Switch to a single pair of running shoes. You'll be glad you did. That is your road tip of the week. Now, before we move on, I want to take the space in the show that we usually reserve for sharing some news from us. And today, instead, share some news from a friend that I think you will find really helpful. A friend of the podcast and travel marketing expert Dan Christian is hosting the second annual Travel Trends AI Summit. And we want to let you know about it and give you a fantastic opportunity to save a lot of money on attending this event. Now, Dan, if you don't remember, was on an episode of the podcast called How the Pandemic Changed Travelers back in March of 2024. We'll link to that in the show notes in case you want to go listen to it. And he is hosting his second annual Travel Trends AI Summit. This is a virtual event that is going to take place October 28th and 29th from about 11 o'clock to 4 o'clock each of those days online. If you attend this summit, you're going to hear keynotes and see demos and get to sit in on some fireside chats with some of the brightest minds in travel technology. If you are the kind of person who is excited about AI or just curious about how AI might be able to benefit your travel organization, or maybe even whether you need to change some of the things you're doing in response to possible threats or incursion from artificial intelligence, this is an event that you definitely want to participate in. Now, registration for this event is priced at $149 per person. But for our Gather and Go audience, Dan is offering a $100 discount. That's right. You can register for this summit for only $49. Now, to do that, you can use the special registration link that is in the show notes for this episode, or you can simply go to traveltrendspodcast.com, find the event listed there, and then when you register, use the code TTGather at checkout. That is the letter T, another letter T, and the word gather at checkout. When you do that, it's going to knock $100 off your price. And hey, I just want to let you know, we are not making any money on this. Dan isn't a sponsor. He hasn't paid us to endorse this event, but I think it is a great opportunity for you. Our staff is going to be attending and learning right along with you. And I would love to see you make the most of this opportunity. Well, it is just about time for us to get into our featured conversation with Ross Evans. Before we do, let me remind you that you can find a wrap-up of some of the most important things Ross had to say in the show notes for this episode. Show notes, of course, are the text that appears right below the audio player wherever you listen to podcasts or on the page for this episode on our website. You can also find show notes and recaps for the more than 80 episodes we have done on our site at grouptravelleader.com/podcast. After we finish the interview here today, I'm also going to come back and do a quick recap of some of those really important things Ross had to say. And I hope you will stick around to the end of that recap, because when we're done, I'm going to share my thoughts on the most important ingredient your group trips are probably missing. That's the topic of today's Hot Minute. You won't want to miss that. We'll be right back with Ross Evans. All right, everybody. My guest today is a digital marketing and design expert who's been serving clients in the tourism space since 2013. He's vice president of Redpoint, an agency where he leads digital marketing and website design programs for tourism organizations around the world. He's also one of the founding organizers of the United States Tour Operators Association's annual Digital Marketing Academy. Ross Evans, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Brian. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I am glad to have you here. I want to know, when in your life did you realize that you were a visual guy and you had a talent for using visuals to tell stories?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I actually look back on my first job out of college. So 20-something years ago, I had a business degree and didn't really know what I wanted to do, and took a job, an entry-level job working for New Balance, the athletic footwear company. And the corporate offices are in Boston, and I was in Boston. And it was really the first time that I was close to design. And I could see how marketing and design sort of played together all under one roof in the New Balance headquarters. You know, both product design, being really close to product design, but also design as it relates to marketing and branding. So that was really the first exposure that I had to it. And that set me off on a 20+ year career that I've been on.
Yeah, that's great. So how did that career bring you to tourism from athletic shoes?
Yeah, it definitely is not a straight line.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was a draw to move back to Vermont, actually, the state that I grew up in. You know, I had been living in Boston and had a young family and just wanted to get back to my roots a little bit. And I found a job as head of e-commerce and digital marketing for a company called Simon Pierce, which makes really high-end glass and pottery and is not a travel company.
Right.
But they have one of the most popular attractions in the state of Vermont, their flagship store, which is also a glass blowing studio and is also a restaurant. So right behind like the Ben and Jerry's factory, in terms of number of visits, Simon Pierce has this really popular attraction. And that was my first exposure to travel and tourism and attractions. And that's really where I got my start in this world. And I took a really important step when I was there, and that was to acknowledge that I didn't know a lot about tourism. And so I hired a marketing agency that knew a lot about it. And that marketing agency is Redpoint, the company that I currently work for.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. So I want to talk today about visual branding and the role it plays in marketing. I think we all instinctively know that our companies need logos, right? But visual branding is so much more than a logo. So I'd love to get your take on, what is a visual brand? Why does it matter in your business?
Yeah, I think we can go in any number of directions with this, but I think at a very high level, a visual brand is the language that a company uses to articulate its brand values, its brand pillars, how it treats its customers. It's sort of that language that it uses beyond just a logo, you know, so it encompasses things like fonts and color palettes and imagery, even visual layouts on a website. You know, those are all elements that sort of make up a visual brand. And ultimately, I think those are the elements that we look at when we experience a brand for the first time. Those are some of the first things that we see. And those are important because they make a first impression. We process color and texture and shape before we read a single word. And so all those elements that make up a visual brand are our first impression of that company.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You said a visual brand can communicate your brand values. I'm curious to know how that, how a font, how a color palette, how a wingding or a piece of clip art, how that communicates something about what you value as a company, because that seems like a pretty big piece of information to get across artistically.
Yeah, and probably those individual elements on their own don't often communicate such a strong thing as a brand value, but collectively those elements together can evoke a lot about personality, a brand personality. Is your brand personality to be very formal, to be very buttoned up, to be very serious? You're probably going to use like a traditional font, like a font that has a serif look to it. You're probably going to use lifestyle imagery that's very formal and sort of staged and set. So again, I think all these elements together, as they sort of come together, can evoke a lot of emotion and can get that personality across when it's done well. And it's not always done well.
Yeah. Branding is one of those things for a lot of people where if you don't work in the field, you can't necessarily say these are the elements of a good brand, but when one is bad, you just know, right? Like something just seems off, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's, our role as sort of consultants working with brands is oftentimes to come in as that sort of objective third party and look at a brand and find those elements that are off or find those components that aren't really working and help a brand or help a business elevate those. And oftentimes we're not the first to point them out. We're just that sort of objective third party, and we're able to come in and share that insight with them.
Yeah. Do you find that when a brand does not align with the company's values, when it's doing a poor job of communicating, hey, this is going to be a really high level of service, we're going to give you a premium experience, you're going to be taken care of from A to Z, is that negatively impacting the company's performance, its click-through rates, its conversions, its bottom line?
Yeah. Yeah, we can definitely draw those parallels. And I think that the area that we usually see that come forward the most is when it's inconsistent, when the brand is represented inconsistently across multiple platforms. That's when you start to see some erosion in the credibility that the prospect or the customer has in the brand. And if, we've seen instances where a brand name shows up in 3 or 4 different formats, whether it has an Inc. after it or it has a co. after it. And even just those minor inconsistencies in the consumer's mind, they just add up to erosion in potential credibility. So you can definitely draw a straight line between those two.
Yeah, even if the consumer's not clocking it consciously.
100%. Yeah. And oftentimes they're not. It's just something has happened along the way and they've dropped off of the sort of conversion path because they didn't feel it. They weren't feeling that emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about tourism businesses specifically, is visual branding, you think, maybe more important than other industries, or are the visuals of the destinations we're selling so compelling on their own that, our company's brand doesn't need to be as strong?
No, I think it's more important. I think it's more important for travel companies to have brands that are built really thoughtfully and really consistently and evoke the emotion. I mean, travel is such an emotional purchase, right? I mean, unless we're traveling for work where we just need a place to stay, that's sort of a utility. There's not a lot of thought or emotion there. But otherwise, it's an emotional decision. And everyone in the sort of cycle of selling a destination has to be on board and get that emotion across. So we don't want to leave it to chance, which we see a lot of times with businesses that are struggling, is they're just sort of leaving that brand and that brand experience to chance. And it's just an opportunity for someone else to come in and do it in a better way and capture that booking. So I definitely think it's more important for travel companies to have a really consistent and a really well thought out brand.
Yeah. A lot of travel companies, I think of tour companies, for instance, who are selling ultimately the same set of destinations. And, they have to be competitive on price. They have to be competitive on amenities and inclusion. So there's only so many ways to differentiate yourself from the other players in the market. Do you think it's a case where in some instances, the company with a stronger brand wins, even if there's absolute parity between every other element of the experience?
I do. Yeah. When a consumer's making a decision between, say comparable tour companies, the brand consistency, I think, can play a big role in what sways one towards another. And it's just having that 100% confidence that you're going to exchange money and you're going to get the product that you want, oftentimes does come down to those little inconsistencies or those little sort of elements that folks have left to chance. So absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So let's break it down. Let's talk about the building blocks or the hallmarks of a good visual brand for a travel company. What do I need to focus on if I'm going to focus on my brand for my travel company?
Yeah. Obviously the logo is a critical element of that, but other elements that make up really strong visual brands in the travel space, color palette, that's oftentimes really, really an afterthought, but is just as important as the logo. The typography that's going to fit with the logo and fit on top of that color palette. So font choice, what's the primary font, secondary font. And then another element that I think is oftentimes overlooked is image styling. What emotion are you going to get across with the image style that you've selected? Even down to the filters you're going to use on Instagram when you post an image about the destination or about your product. And then there's things like layout style on websites and graphic style, elements like that. And then the other piece that I would say is really, really critical that ties it all together are brand guidelines. And that's a step that I see a lot of people miss when they have a really nice looking, really well thought out brand when they roll it out. But because they don't have guidelines that sort of show everyone who's in the organization how to use the brand and how to articulate the brand, ultimately over time, it's just going to get eroded and it's going to change and it's going to shift. So having brand guidelines is really, really important. And I probably sound like a visual professor or a brand professor, like the most I don't know. But it's important. Brand guidelines are really, really critical and something that I would not skip if I were a travel business.
Yeah. So for people that aren't familiar with that, what are brand guidelines? Who sets them? What do they entail? Yeah. Do you get in trouble if you break them?
Yeah. Brand guidelines really simply just sort of lay out how to use the logo, how to use color, how to use the fonts, what font to use, what size the font should be. It's really sort of the playbook for the brand. And it's just a foundational piece for ensuring consistency across any marketing channel. And that's really critical because we have travelers, we have consumers who are experiencing your brand all over the internet, some of it in person. We still have companies sending out brochures. So, you've got a lot of different touch points. And so the brand guide will sort of spell out exactly how the brand should be represented in each one of those different touch points.
Yeah. So does this mean that, let's say I'm a very small operator, I'm a solopreneur, and I've got an intern from the college down the road who, maybe is going to do social for me, or my nephew said, yeah, pay me $100 a month and I'll post some stuff for you. Do I need to maybe not work with them and do something that's more, formal, cost intensive, intentional? Or is there a way to, work with those sort of informal channels using brand guidelines and still get a cohesive brand message across all the different platforms?
Yeah, I do think it's a little different for small businesses, entrepreneurs, folks who are just getting started, where you may not have quite as strict brand guidelines or intense brand guidelines. But I think the important thing is defining who you are as a brand. What do you value? What are your business goals first? And then being able to develop a brand on top of that. Develop the logo, develop a really tight set of fonts that you want to use and a really nice color palette that you want to use, and get that foundation set. Oftentimes, I think entrepreneurs, we get so excited and we want to create the logo and just get it out there.
Right.
But taking a step back and ensuring that you have a really strong foundation with a few really, really cohesive elements is probably the critical thing for a small business when budget is more of a concern.
So you would emphasize consistency in a few elements more than having a comprehensive branding package.
Totally. Yeah. Even consistency across a few elements when it's done really, really well is going to put you at a more level playing field with bigger companies, more established brands, for sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So let's talk about the companies that have been around a while. They've had their logo for, 5, 10, 20 years, maybe more. How does a company know when it's really time to put that brand under the microscope? Think about freshening it up. Think about starting from scratch. How do you decide whether it's a tweak, whether it's a blank sheet of paper? What's the metric you use to make these decisions?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably not one metric that I would say to look at. There are oftentimes technical changes that force us to relook at our brands. I mean, I've been in the business long enough to remember when mobile responsiveness came out and everybody had to redesign their websites because it had to look good on a mobile phone. And when people were doing that, they were finding that their brands just didn't translate to this smaller new world. So there's technical things that happen that sort of force our hand to change. But then there's other things. There's, oftentimes the best brands are a reflection of who their customers are. And you could start to notice that there's a disconnect between how your brand is connecting with who your customers are. And if you feel like there's a disconnection there, if you feel like your customers are valuing things that your brand no longer represents, that's a really important signal that, it's time to look at maybe a refresh. I would also look at how your internal team is using the brand. And what we oftentimes see with larger companies is internal team members are using the brand or making changes or adjustments to a brand that was not the original intention behind the sort of visuals behind the brand. So if you start to see, well, people need the logo in a different format, or people are sort of stretching and using a different font that's not necessarily approved, don't throw the brand guidelines at them necessarily. Maybe take a step back and say, maybe there's an opportunity for a refresh if our team is finding that they don't have what they need in the brand. So those are a few of the things that I would sort of keep an eye on.
Yeah. I seem to see a pattern, especially among bigger companies. New leadership comes in and they want to make their mark. And an easy way to do that is a brand refresh. And they pull in their buddies from, an agency they worked with 2 companies ago and throw a lot of budget at it. And you get something new. Is that a legitimate reason for a brand refresh, or does it really need to be more intentional than that?
I don't know if it's legitimate or or not legitimate. And I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing when that happens. I think if it's done with the right intention, if there's a foundational reason, hey, our brand values have changed because the company's now under new leadership and we want to attract a different audience than we've been attracting. Yeah, that's certainly valid to then make that change if there's been some sort of sea change within the organization. Certainly change just for change's sake. I don't necessarily think that's something you want to run after. But I would look a little deeper at sort of the foundation of the brand. And if there's a significant change in focus, then absolutely a rebrand is needed.
Yeah. Have you seen examples of times when a brand was so good, so iconic in its visuals that you would say, don't touch that brand for no matter what else you do, don't change this name, don't change this logo because it's iconic.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you see some examples sometimes of brands that are large and they make a big point about the rebrand that they've gone through, and you see a head to head of the the original logo and the new logo, and it's like you'd have to have a microscope to know the difference between the two.
Yeah.
That I think I see more often than not. And I think that's what you're getting at, is like there's some brands that you just don't necessarily want to touch. I'd harken back to my sneaker days and say, the New Balance swoosh probably doesn't need to be changed.
Right.
Or the Nike swoosh, sorry, doesn't need to be changed. And certainly the name Nike doesn't need to be changed. I mean, there are definitely iconic brands out there. But again, even those iconic brands, they go through little minor changes, little minor updates. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the design studio that's helping sandals work through a little bit of a rebrand sort of presented some of the initial work that they've done and how they've evolved the sandals brand. And it was fascinating to hear the process and learn about it. And it's not a drastic, from a logo standpoint, it's not a drastic change, but it's subtle. It's like turning around a freight ship. It doesn't happen quickly, but there's sort of little itty bitty sort of moments in there that probably add up to something meaningful.
Yeah. So we have a lot of solopreneurs in our audience, or people that are, maybe 1, 2, 3 person business. For those who say, okay, I'm on board with this, my brand needs some work. What's the most effective way for them to get help with, things ranging from logo design to brand guidelines? These people don't have, $50,000 to throw to an agency to do that. So how do you get it done and get it done well at your budget level?
Yeah. The first thing I would do is I'd go back to some of those foundational questions that I mentioned earlier. Define your brand personality, define your brand goals. What do you want people to feel when they see your brand? What do you want people to feel when they experience you online? So I would answer some of those questions first. And then, certainly there's a lot of good resources out there to find reasonable design talent that's not expensive. Upwork is a website, Fiverr is a website.
Mm-hmm.
You can sort of sift through a lot of different designers and find somebody that maybe has some travel experience, which is really key, but also is designing in a style that you like. Have a point of view on design when you're going into a process like this. It doesn't cost any amount of money to take time to evaluate what you like in design and then try to find someone that can execute on that. Create a Pinterest board or save Instagram accounts to a folder on your Instagram page of stuff that you like. Having those resources and having those references to show a designer is going to save a lot of time in the end. And I can tell you, one of the hardest, most challenging clients we have to work with is somebody who says, I know what I like when I see it.
Right.
And it happens a lot. And you can imagine from an agency standpoint, designing to that spec is very, very difficult and takes a lot of time to sort of narrow in on that. So for someone looking to get through on a relatively small budget or get through relatively quickly, get through that process, have a design perspective going into it and have some references of stuff that you like.
Yeah, great tip. So on the other end of the spectrum, let's talk about those larger organizations who want to work on their brands, but it's got to be seamless. There's brand equity already. They can't have downtime on the website. They can't afford brand confusion in the marketplace. So they've got to do it at a high level. What kinds of experts should they be looking for? And let's just get down to the brass tacks. How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost to do a really high level brand refresh?
Yeah. I mean, the cost is hard to pinpoint, but I mean, you threw out $50,000 earlier. I wouldn't be surprised if brand refreshes cost, more than that in a really intense environment where you have a lot of brand touch points that need to be considered. But amount of time is going to vary dramatically as well. We've done brand refreshes in 2 to 3 months. We've done them in a year and a half.
Wow.
A lot of it depends on how active you are as a client. How quickly are you going to make decisions? And then who is making those decisions?
Mm.
Obviously, if there's a committee that you are reporting to that's going to help make these decisions, the brand process, the brand refresh is going to take a much longer amount of time than if you're just if it's 1 or 2 people able to make decisions relatively quickly. You could get a brand refresh done in 3 to 4 months if you're able to make those quick decisions.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean that's sort of what I would look at. And if I were a bigger brand, I'd look for a design studio or an agency that has travel experience. The reality is designing a brand for travel is just different than designing a brand for a consumer product or for an athletic company. There's just too many touch points and there's too many sort of intricacies. So finding a design studio or an agency that has experience in travel, I think is really critical.
Yeah. We've all heard the term design by committee. That tends to be a pejorative. In your experience, is there sort of an ideal number of people who can really speak into that design process? I would imagine you don't want one person to be solely responsible for working with the agency,
Yeah.
but you probably don't want a dozen people,
Yeah.
giving notes. So what's the best strategy there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's 2 to 5. I think tends to be sort of the a decent number. Again, these are the 2 to 5 people who have direct contact with the agency or the studio, and they're on the conference calls, they're on the the idea sessions, they're on the brainstorms. Certainly you get above a handful of people, and everybody's been in those meetings where you're trying to get a decision made when there's a dozen people in the room, and it's just very, very difficult. And design is so personal to people. Everybody brings their perspective, their background, their history, and everybody's a little bit different. So the more people you have, absolutely, the harder it is to get to a decision.
So once you've got a great visual brand, maybe you've done a redesign, whatever you've done, how do you make sure you're making the most of it in your marketing strategy and leverage it in a way that gets more people to click buy now?
Yeah, the first step I would take is have a really, really well thought out communication strategy about the new brand. That's really what's going to start. You don't want to just roll this thing out there and not acknowledge to your past guests, to your past customers that this thing is happening. So having a really, really tight, both external communication strategy to your customers, but also internal to your stakeholders, your frontline people, your customer service people, the folks who may not have been involved in that design process, but who are going to likely be answering questions about it. Everybody, you want to put as much into that internal communication strategy as that external communication strategy, because everybody needs to be on board. Everybody needs to be, working from the same playbook. So I think that's probably the most critical first step. And the other thing I would say is just remember that your brand refresh is really important to you. After that initial sort of relaunch or however you've gone about it, I mean, your customers sort of getting back into their regular rhythm of interacting with you.
Mm.
So there's certainly this moment of everything's new and interesting and fresh, but with any refresh that we've worked on, the customer's really quick to just go back to just deliver the product. Great. Congratulations on your new logo. Let's go back to just delivering us the experience that we paid you for. And so it's important to know going into a refresh that you're going to care about it way more than your customer does. And that's totally okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good to know. So what is the best way for people to connect with you, follow you, learn more about Redpoint, and maybe explore, what it would look like to collaborate?
Yeah. Certainly redpointmarketingpr.com is our website. We'd love to have people visit us there. We produce a once a month newsletter that is called Tickled Red. And it's all about travel industry news, hospitality news, tips, tricks for marketing. It's totally free. It's once a month, and it's chock full of case studies, things that we've worked on, projects that we've just seen happen within the industry that we really feel like are worth sharing and amplifying. And again, it's all about travel marketing tips. So I would definitely highly recommend folks sign up on the website. If they go to redpointmarketingpr.com, they can see in the top right corner a call to action to sign up for that newsletter.
Yeah, fantastic. We will link to that in the show notes to make it easy for everybody to find. Now, before I let you go, we have some questions we ask everybody, and these are just for fun. So you can answer off the top of your head, no pressure. When you book travel, are you going to book a window seat or an aisle seat?
Window seat.
Yeah. You just like the view?
I love the view, and I sleep on planes. So it's nice to have that. It's nice to have something to lean on that's not a person.
Yeah. I think the world could be divided into people who can sleep on planes and people who can't sleep on planes. I'm unfortunately in the can't category, so I'm envious of that talent for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. If I'm not driving or flying it myself, I mean, it starts moving, I can fall asleep.
All right. So what is one thing in your carry-on you wouldn't travel without?
Ooh, cell phone charger, which sounds really lame, but yeah, cell phone charger.
It's boring, but if you go somewhere without it, you're in a panic, right? Like,
yeah,
the world's on fire.
And the places you can easily buy a cell phone charger, they're 2 or 3 times as much as they should be.
Yes.
So yeah, cell phone charger, got to have it in the carry-on.
If you had a free airline pass and a week with nothing else to do, where would you be headed next?
Ooh, Dornoch, Scotland, to play golf at Royal Dornoch, because I'm an absolute golf nut, and that's a place that's on my bucket list.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Last question. What is one thing you have seen or done on the road that you wish you could go back and experience again with somebody you love?
Ooh, visiting the island of St. Lucia. We worked with the St. Lucia Tourism Board for a number of years, and I got to travel to St. Lucia 4 or 5 times, always by myself, never with my family. And it's just a really spectacular place. So I'd love to get back to St. Lucia and bring my family along for the ride.
Yeah. Put it on the bucket list.
It's on vacation. There. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. One of these days. Well, Ross, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time and all your knowledge.
Absolutely, Brian. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ross as much as I did. And I know there was a lot in there, especially if you are not the kind of person who is used to paying a lot of attention to things like fonts and colors and digital brands. So I want to take a minute and recap some of the most key things Ross had to say, just to make sure that you don't miss these underlying principles amidst all of the jargon and technical terms. Now, when we were talking about the power of visual branding, Ross said, a visual brand is the language a company uses to articulate its brand pillars, its brand values, how it treats its customers. He said they're important because they make a first impression. We process color and texture and shape before we read a single word. I found that really compelling. Of course, as a journalist and writer, I love to think that everyone in the world processes text first and thinks about text and elevates text in their mind. But I know the reality is that Ross is right. People sort of gauge things visually. They get an impression, they get an emotional idea about something visually before they even start to process the text of what they're seeing with their brains, which means that you may have the greatest name in the world. You may have the greatest trips in the world. You may have the greatest service in the world. But if the colors and shapes and other brand elements that people see when they encounter your company logo or other branding, if those things don't reinforce what you are trying to communicate with your brand, then you're actually working against yourself. And that is not a position you want to be in. Now, when I asked Ross about how a strong brand helps you compete in a crowded marketplace, he said, when a consumer is making a decision between comparable tour companies, the brand consistency can play a big role in swaying towards one or another. It's having that 100% confidence that you're going to exchange money and get the product you want. Oftentimes, it comes down to those little inconsistencies or elements folks have left to chance. Now, this is something I have seen over and over again. Companies spend some money, they create a brand, but then life happens and they get busy and things get messy and formats of things change online and sizes and specifications evolve. And before you know it, there are 3 or 4 different versions of that logo floating around. Maybe a new team member comes on who doesn't know about the fonts or the style guide, or they decide to use different colors on a different project. And before you know it, the brand gets a little bit diluted because those rules haven't been followed specifically. And I think Ross is pointing to something really key here. Your customers probably aren't thinking about your brand in conscious terms. And yet, if they're comparing you to another competitor, and that competitor is tight and consistent with their branding, and you are not, subconsciously, they're going to find themselves drawn to that other company because that tight branding is sending the message that we are professional, we are consistent, and you can trust us. Well, that's the message you want to be sending too, and that means you've got to pay attention not only to having a great brand, but being consistent with that brand. Finally, when I asked Ross about how small companies can get started on visual brands, even when they're working with tight budgets, he said, the important thing is defining who you are as a brand. What do you value? What are your business goals? Then develop a brand on top of that. Develop a tight set of fonts and a color palette you want to use. He went on to say, a lot of times we just create the logo and get it out there. But taking a step back and ensuring you have a strong foundation with a few really cohesive elements is the thing that's really important for a small business. Consistency across a few elements, when it's done really well, is going to put you at a level playing field with bigger companies and more established brands. I love this. A lot of us, when we are starting companies, we are excited about getting it off the ground, and maybe we hire somebody to do a quick logo, and then the reality of being an entrepreneur and the flood of things we have to take care of sort of overwhelms us. And so we never stop to think about whether that brand is a good one, whether it communicates what we really value, whether we are using it right. And I think Ross makes a good point here. If you will carve out the time and the intentionality to really make sure you are setting a strong foundation with your brand and you're being consistent with it, it puts you in a place to compete against companies 2 times, 5 times, 10 times your size to steal some market share from organizations that you ordinarily wouldn't have any business competing against. If you're a travel entrepreneur, that is exactly what you want to be doing. I hope you will take these tips to heart. Great stuff here from Ross Evans. Well, I'm fresh back in the office this week after spending a few days at the Student and Youth Travel Association's annual conference. It was great to spend some time with SITA and its tour operators, and I was so impressed by the way those people are focused on the purpose of what they do. Of course, they are specialists in educational travel, and that puts a real onus on them to deliver trips that make a difference in the lives of their students. They talked about it basically at every moment of the conference. I found it super inspiring, and it got me to thinking about whether there are ways that those of us outside the student travel space could be doing a similar kind of thing. That is the topic of today's Hot Minute. Yeah, that's right. The Hot Minute is the portion of the program where I take 60 seconds to give you my unfiltered views on an issue that impacts tourism every day. And today we're asking ourselves, what is the most important ingredient our trips are missing? So let's put 60 seconds on the clock and get into it. The most important ingredient your trips are missing is probably a well-defined mission. We all like to say that travel can be life-changing, but how often do we actually see lives changed on our trips? In reality, that only happens when someone is intentional about making it happen. For some types of travel groups, like students or churches, this comes naturally, but you don't have to be an educator or a religious leader to plan trips that make a difference in people's lives. You just need to know what your mission is. Your mission could be helping people build friendships, introducing curious minds to the world, raising money for community organizations, or just keeping people fit and active in retirement. Whatever your mission is, defining and articulating it will help you build trips that actually accomplish it. Those are the kind of trips that people remember, and the kind that make them want to travel with you again. That's the Hot Minute. That's the way I see things anyway. Of course, as always, you are welcome to disagree with me, and we can still be friends. And hey, whether you agree or disagree, we would love to hear from you. You can send your thoughts, questions, or inspirational travel stories to podcast@grouptravelleader.com. I read every email that comes into that account. I really do love hearing from you. And hey, you never know. Your ideas might just be the topic of the next Hot Minute. And hey, while you're in the mood to give us some feedback, would you do me a big favor? Would you go to your favorite podcast playing app? And if you haven't already subscribed to the show, then do it there. While you're there, if you could give us a rating and leave us a review, that would be a big help. I am so thankful to everyone who has done that so far. My thanks as well to Ross Evans for joining me today. On the next episode, I'm going to bring you a really useful conversation with Andrea Ross of Cultivate Advisors, who's going to share the travel entrepreneur's journey from startup to acquisition. This is one you do not want to miss. Until then, though, remember this. At the end of the day, we're all on this trip together, so let's make it a good one. See you next time on Gather and Go. Gather and Go is hosted and executive produced by me, Brian Jewell. Our publisher is Mac Lacey. Danya Simmons is our creative director. Ashley Ricks is our circulation manager and graphic designer. Our sales team is Kyle Anderson and Talisa Reck. To advertise on the podcast, call Talisa at 859-253-0455. Gather and Go is a production of the Group Travel Leader. For more information about our magazines, podcasts, and events, visit us online at grouptravelleader.com.